Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And what's up? Welcome in. GC Live. Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark. Transfer portal rolling right along. Gamecocks National Signing Day right around the corner. Wednesday, believe it or not. I mean, last couple of weeks has just flown by as we've all had our attention on the transfer portal. But coming up on Wednesday, around 17 future Gamecocks will lock in with South Carolina in terms of high school and junior college prospects. That number could give or take a little bit, but that's right around the number right now. 17 or so is what I would say. Again, this is GC Live. He's Chris. I'm Wes. Chris looks like he's doing math in the top of his head right now. Presented by Clint Hammond.
I'm doing some thinking, Wes.
What'd you figure out? What'd you learn?
I hadn't figured it out yet, but I'm definitely doing some thinking.
Okay, don't hurt yourself. You were deep in thought on that one. clint.hammond.com, 803-771-6933. Don't think, just call Clint if you're in the market for a new home. Interest rates, Chris, I don't know if you track this stuff, but they've been starting to inch down a little bit, I think, from what I've seen maybe. And so if you've been waiting, been thinking about buying a home, if you're ready to make the move, call Clint. He is a mortgage broker right here in Columbia. Office is right across from Drury High School, but he can help you no matter where you are in our great state of South Carolina. Again, lots of portal talk today. Talk a little high school recruiting. Couple more welcome homes go public over the weekend. Another outstanding welcome home that's out there. And just, plenty to get to, man. It doesn't stop. It doesn't slow. And National Signing Day has really snuck right up on us, it feels like.
Well, that's the big one now, Wes. We've been doing early signing day for what, 5-6 cycles now, which is hard to believe. I still remember being at Josh Van's high school early in the morning, the very first early signing day in Atlanta at Tucker High. We're hanging out with Josh Van there. And that was the first year. And it's really taken over, Wes. I mean, it's the main one. And of course, add to that over the past few cycles, the proliferation of the transfer portal, especially with the free transfer. Now December is the big offseason for college football. It is the month where you see the transactions happen, right? You see the high school guys signing, junior college additions. If schools have some, South Carolina will have one of those, obviously, and then the transfer portal. And it's made it dominant to where, man, I don't know, in February, late signing day, maybe we'll have a couple things to monitor, a thing here or there, but we might not have anything to monitor because it looks like the hay is largely going to be in the barn for the high school class. And then a good chunk, actually, of the transfer signing class as well will be on board. Of course, there's another transfer window after spring football. But for the purposes of signing day, man, the December one is the big one. And then you add in, of course, all the transfer portal activity that we have been tracking.
Yeah, I mean, dude, if I'm a high school coach, trainer, confidant, if I'm anybody helping a high school kid through this process, if you got an offer and it's somewhere you want to be, I am not waiting until February. And that is maybe always been the case to an extent, but we do see a certain percentage of guys who are like, oh, nope, my recruitment's taking off right now. I'm just going to wait until February. But with the portal and teams saying, you know what, the portal may have given a ton of power back to the college athlete, but it also gave some power to the schools compared to high school kids to where, you know what, they're going to say, sorry, man, we probably just can't wait on you. We cannot not feel this need. So we've seen most guys sign in the early signing period, but there's always a few that wait. I feel like we're going to see, just judging the room here, we're going to see less and less and less of that moving forward, at least with this current structure for how college football is. Certainly seems like all of South Carolina's guys that are going to be in the class, are going to go ahead and sign. And I mean, dude, I don't even know if there's a guy that I've seen planning to wait until February that is still being recruited by South Carolina.
Yeah, I was trying to go through the same thing in my head. That was actually not what I was thinking about at the beginning of the show, Wes, but I was just thinking about it. I can't think of one. And it seems like we would have to go back and kind of remind ourselves, because these things, man, they're so chaotic that every year you and I will be thinking back to a previous signing day. Oh, remember that? Remember when that happened? Oh, yeah, I do remember that. But right now, you can go back and think of, it seems like most cycles, most of the signees, most of the guys that you're tracking are either signing in December or you're like tracking an announcement. But it does seem like there's been a couple who say, hey, that one will probably go to February. Can't think of it this time, because the main public guy that we know that we've been tracking publicly for South Carolina is DeBron Gatling, the high school wide receiver from Milton High School, Alpharetta, Georgia. He's going to be a December guy too. Wes, I think you and I have been kind of tag teaming, going up and down the commitment list. All the guys that we expect to sign with South Carolina, haven't heard of any of them waiting. And in fact, a big chunk of the class is actually going to be an early enrollee as well. And so that factors into all this. So I'm just sitting here going, hey, maybe they get in on a guy late that's a high school player that they kind of keep an eye on, and maybe there's a chance for a late signee. But really, South Carolina's strategy has been go out, get as many guys as you can signed that are priorities from the high school ranks, from junior college, and then go out and hit the transfer portal. And again, we know most of that activity is also going to take place this month here in December.
Yeah, no doubt, man. So I think a lot of teams will see almost like a reset after Wednesday. Maybe you sit there and say, all right, we feel this need, this need, this need. Maybe there's a couple of new portal offers that go out. Maybe there's still some high school guys that it kind of resets for, but for the most part, I don't know, man. It's probably it for high school guys. I would certainly, again, if I'm a parent, if I'm a coach, I'm telling my guy, take what you got. If you got a scholarship, let's lock that thing in and take it. Speaking of scholarships, South Carolina adding a couple of guys to the roster over the weekend. And, I would say both these guys, based on our reporting and with Gerald Kilgore, probably fairly obvious there, even going back to the weekend prior. Some leans to South Carolina that make it official. Brady Hunt committing to South Carolina on Saturday, going public on Sunday. Big kid, 6'6", 249. That was what he was listed at Ball State. I actually asked him, Chris. He said he measured in just about that exactly at South Carolina on his visit as well. So fairly up to date listing there as far as his measurables. And this is a pickup, Chris. It's not going to gain the headlines of a Rocket Sanders or if you went out and got a quarterback or a big time receiver, but partially that's just because it's a tight end. But I think you can go ahead and probably pencil Brady Hunt in to being somebody who could be in the rotation at that position next year.
I think so, man. And I know I've said this before, but probably worth restating. It reminds me kind of the Nate Adkins situation when South Carolina took him in 2022. Because remember, a lot of the talk that offseason was, remember South Carolina was tight on numbers at that point. And so it was kind of the last spot going to Nate Adkins. People were going, wait a minute, why a tight end? Because at that time you had, you'll probably have to help me, Wes, make sure. You had Trey Kenyon. You had Jaheim Bell, right? You had some guys in that tight end room who were good players. But South Carolina decided, hey, we like Nate Adkins. We like what he can bring to this team. We like the skill set that he has. And so they bring him in, and he ended up, obviously, as we know, the rest is history. He ended up being an integral part of this team, particularly, the back half of that season when South Carolina scored a couple really big wins. And Wes, may have won the bowl game against Notre Dame had he not gone down in that contest based on how he was performing early in that game. Now on an NFL roster, right? You look at the tight end room this year, and you may have a similar thought. We know you lose Trey Knox, but you've got Josh Simon coming back. You took a heavy tight end class to flip that room after you lost everybody after the 22 season. So you not only have Josh Simon, but you got Nick Elksnis, who you previously brought in as a transfer. And you have several guys who were freshmen last year, Connor Cox, Reed McKeska, Cam Sandlin. So you got some numbers there. But here's what you get with Brady Hunt, a guy who's proven, who's got size, who can be a dual threat, I think you could say, at tight end, and that he's going to be able to block and catch the ball for you, especially downfield as a tight end. And you got to keep in mind, Wes, these are the body types that can play a lot of special teams for you. And it's not like behind Simon that South Carolina is super proven. You've basically got Simon. You've got Connor Cox, who did play a decent amount this past season. And then you've got some guys that have redshirted. And so you can kind of see if you start going through the room in that manner, you can see why South Carolina decided to add Brady Hunt. And then, of course, you're going to add Michael Smith from the high school ranks to that equation too. You go into this season feeling probably pretty good about this tight end room again.
Yeah, Michael Smith, man, that's a guy that just quietly is way, way, way up there in the rankings. And,
Yep.
I said this on the radio show today. He likes to remind people that, hey, I'm a blocker too. Like he is willing to get in there, get his hands dirty, be a blocker, and be physical. But if you look at the film, you look at the ability here, the thing that makes Michael Smith potentially special is just the ball skills, the ability to run, the ability to catch the football down the field, as opposed to just being a tight end who can make catches down near the line of scrimmage. And so that was one thing Will Helms actually mentioned with Brady Hunt, that he has a knack, at least the analytics show, for catching the football down the field as well. So I think you've added some guys to that room. You have to replace Trey Knox, but some guys that can step right in there and help quite a bit. We'll see. I think with freshmen, the more you watch, the more it's like, especially this early, I can tell you who the guys are that look like they have the ability to play early, but you just never really know. This time last year, I wouldn't have been telling you Judge Collier was going to play more at corner, than any other freshman cornerback. And so, that one didn't play out like you would maybe think. You maybe could have circled a Jalen Kilgore and said, that guy's got a chance to play quite a bit, but maybe not to the extent that it actually did. And obviously at the beginning, injuries played a big part in that. So it is hard to predict, but I do think Michael Smith he'll have to beat out some guys in front of him to play. But if you look at that spot, you do have to, I think, feel pretty good about it. And they've done a good job of supplementing with the portal, and they flipped the room completely last year. But Chris, they flipped it and they didn't stop. Remember, they didn't just say, we feel pretty good. They kept adding people. We had a question about Cam Sandlin. Cam did play some running back in practice, but then, I think last we heard he had slid back to tight end. So, he's in that room. There's going to be, I think, a fight for PT once you sort of get past a Josh Simon, but that's absolutely a good thing, I think, for South Carolina. And so speaking of Kilgore, Gerald Kilgore, the other public welcome home at this point, commitment to South Carolina. I wanted to go through the process a little bit, Chris, but I think my thought was the only way Gerald Kilgore was not going to end up at South Carolina was going to be if he went to West Virginia and just fell in love with it and just decided, you know what? I just want to do something different than my brother. We see that every now and then, maybe not even every now and then. We see that from time to time where you might, as a fan, be saying, hey, we got one brother, let's get the other. And one of them would just say, I kind of want to take my own path. Well, in this case, the Kilgores seem to be a pretty tight-knit family, and now you're going to have both Kilgores under one roof at South Carolina.
Yeah, a family reunion of sorts, Wes, and couple good players, man, who just look at Jalen Kilgore. he did everything in high school, but I think punt team. I mean, he was a returner. He ran the ball. He played receiver. He played defense. He really never came off the field. And he parlayed that into, a nice ranking, a nice offer list, and kind of quietly, but got to South Carolina, played earlier than expected, and had a really, really good freshman campaign, Wes. His brother, a lot more under the radar, right? High school quarterback, had not played defensive back, and really kind of exploded the back half of last season, Wes. This is something you pointed out. I think he played in 9 games, but his snaps really, really went up in the last 4 to 5 games of the season. Earlier in the year, last season, he was playing, 15, 16 snaps. End of the year, he's playing starter snaps. And if you go look at his PFF metrics, if you go look at his statistics, he filled the stat sheet up pretty well, Wes. Had a lot of what PFF calls stops, which is basically, I think I like how you put it earlier, the opposite of offensive success rate. It's basically if a defender makes a tackle that just makes the offense totally fail. I think he had 17 of those last year. Contrast that with Jalen Kilgore, who had a really good freshman year. He had 19, and he played probably twice as many snaps as Gerald did. So this is a guy that quietly comes from a small school, played well at the end of last year, and I think still has a lot of room to grow as a nickel or safety type.
Yeah, man. And again, not a portal get that's going to just make the headlines, I think, like a Rocket Sanders will. But I think with the portal, you also are trying to use it to go get guys that make sense, go get guys that fit, and go get guys that can maybe kind of help you fill out your roster and your depth chart. And Kilgore is someone going to play some nickel, could play some safety. Basically, within South Carolina's defense, they cross-train those 3 spots, but they are 3 different positions. Like nickel, you have a free safety, you have a strong safety. They're 3 different spots. And so when Kilgore was on his OV, that was the talk. You're a safety nickel, but we want you to come in, learn all of them, be a potential factor at all of them. I think he's somebody who can get up on special teams as well and just has the right mindset. I think if he's anything like his brother in terms of work ethic and going about it, himself the right way, all those different things that you look for in a teammate, then, that to me, that's an easy yes to add another Kilgore to the roster. And Chris, I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued to get a look at him in person. Intrigued to see what his game is like, see how he matches up athletically, because you're not a region player of the year in football and baseball. I know we're talking about high school to college, but you're not both of those things if you don't have some athleticism about you, some competitive nature about you. South Carolina may quietly be getting an alpha type that fans just aren't quite even aware of yet. So I'll be curious when spring hits to get a look at how he matches up now, being on the same field with some SEC athletes.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, Wes, this one is flying under the radar right now, and probably would be flying under the radar even more if he was Gerald Mitchell. The fact that he's a Kilgore, people are like, all right, I like what Jalen did. They're obviously not the same person, but both DBs, both Kilgore, right? And so I think that's put a little bit more attention on it, but still it's going to fly under the radar much more than, say, Rocket Sanders, right? Because Rocket Sanders, SEC guy at Arkansas, South Carolina fans have seen him, including against South Carolina. They've seen what he can do during that 1,400-yard season. He was a big name in high school recruiting as a former 4-star. Gerald Kilgore, none of those things, right? But if you actually dive into him, you can kind of see, hey, there's a reason that South Carolina wanted to get this guy. I think he's going to fit a need. He could factor in probably earlier than we all anticipated, or maybe would anticipate on the surface. And I think, Wes, special teams is a place where this guy can probably really shine.
Yeah, for sure, man. So we'll, of course, get a good look at him in the spring. and see if he can keep making that push. And former quarterback, both these guys are former quarterbacks who transitioned to another position in college, which I think that means there's some upside to go for for both these guys, and we'll see if South Carolina can sort of pull it out of them as they continue to develop moving forward. Portal class overall, Chris, last I checked, it is a top 5 portal class. I will update that for everybody here in a moment, but certainly I would say, Chris, having a good bit more success is South Carolina in the portal this year than last year. And yeah, number 4 in the On3 transfer portal index, which actually, man, it's kind of fascinating. They tried to find a way to sort of compare production coming into your school versus leaving your school. It's how On3 did it. Again, right now, South Carolina 4th. Now, to be completely fair, there's a big gap between 3 and 4. So it's kind of 1, 2, 3 are fairly close. Louisville, Colorado, and Ole Miss, which I think that matches the eye test, right? Like that feels like this feels like the teams that are doing very well in the portal, right? Louisville, Colorado, Ole Miss, South Carolina, Washington 5, Kentucky 6, Syracuse. Dude, Syracuse is quietly doing some work out there right now.
Brown.
Credit to Syracuse, man. They are killing it. Texas Tech, Boston College. How about them? And then NC State. Those are some schools that are doing well for themselves in the new NIL/portal era right now.
No, and that was going to be my next thought, Wes. You know, you look at least 2 of those top 3, and we know that they have been, to be quite frank, a couple of the biggest spenders in the NIL transfer in the NIL space. Colorado, Deion Sanders said, not going to buy a roster or something similar to that. We know with some of the guys that they've acquired, and it's the reality of the transfer portal, you have to be equipped from an NIL standpoint. So I think the proof's more in the pudding than what he said in a press conference. And I'm not begrudging it, right? South Carolina has gotten a whole heck of a lot better on the NIL front as compared to, say, last year. And so you've seen them be able to do some really good work, West, not only in the transfer portal realm, but you look at the high school class, you have to be able to point to those opportunities to high school kids too. And then current roster retention. Just about every single school, Wes, no, let's not say just about. Every school has been hit this offseason by the transfer portal. Good players. Even Georgia, right? Like Georgia was a school that I think we all looked at as kind of the gold standard, right? They don't have guys leave very often. And even Georgia, we've seen with some defections of not just some players where you go, yeah, that guy didn't really play much. You've seen them lose some guys off their roster that have legitimately factored in during their time in Athens. So I think we're all seeing more and more evidence, of this new era that we're in.
Yeah, no doubt, man. 24/7. Their order is Ole Miss, Colorado, Louisville, Arizona State, TCU, South Carolina. So Gamecock 6th over there. And yeah, NIL is going to be a factor in that. I don't know if you can have success in the portal right now without an NIL factor. Like I really don't. Like you're going to have to do some. I mean, I don't know what kind of voodoo you got to do at this point. Like it's going to have to be very resourceful, right? Like you're not going to have a great portal class. Maybe if you're like the best in the world at evaluating, you might look back and be like, oh, that team didn't do much with NIL, but they ended up with a good class. But on paper, nah, man, you're just not going to be able to do it, I think. And that's just the reality of the college football world right now. So,
Wes, I've got something for you real quick. Sorry to interrupt whatever your next thought was going to be.
No, please.
I just thought of this off the top of my head. All right. It's fair to say this year's portal class for South Carolina is better than last year's, right? We're going, yeah. I mean, that's not even, I just want to make sure we had that established. 2022 versus 24.
Is now 24?
Right now it's 24. Yep. I'm looping that in. I'm including, hey, we're in the 2024 high school cycle. So I'm taking the transfers that South Carolina have for next year. They're in the 24 class. More interesting comparison. In 2022, that cycle was a little bit more before NIL was a huge, huge transfer portal factor. It had just gone live the previous summer, right? But the 2022 class they had some volume in there. Spencer Rattler, Austin Stogner, CBS, Devontae Reed, Juice Wells, Dante Miller was a walk-on, Gibbs was a walk-on, Lavassier Carroll, Terrell Dawkins, Corey Rucker, and Nate Atkins. Pretty good group. Some stars in there. Also some guys that didn't do as much as we probably anticipated. Right? I mean, you had Corey Rucker didn't end up finishing out his career. CBS had some injuries. Lavassier Carroll obviously had to give up the game. That was a pretty good class, though, when you kind of look back on it.
Well, dude, I think just on Spencer, Juice, and Nate alone,
yeah,
it was a pretty good class on those three guys. Like, you look at what they did. CBS would have done more if not hurt, I think. And Corey Rucker, I mean, it just I think he was dealing with some personal stuff and wanted to get back somewhere he was more comfortable. But talent-wise, I mean, South Carolina would probably love to have Corey Rucker on the roster right now, projecting him to next year. So, yeah, that was a good class, man. NIL was a thing, but NIL was not driving the entire portal bus yet at that point, I think. So, yeah, man, it's good. This class, we'll see what happens. But I still think it's got to be a pretty darn good class on paper just to replace what those guys gave you. So,
and obviously incomplete class. You know, there are going to be some more pieces. Transfer portal quarterback. It's not going to be Spencer Rattler, but that's not an apples to apples comparison. It's not what you're going for per se this year. But you're looking to add a quarterback. You might add another offensive lineman. You might add another edge. And then you need a couple receivers, right? And that's generally, there could be some other things pop up here or there between now and, next season, the spring, portal window. But that's kind of what you're looking at. So incomplete right now, but off to a good start, obviously, with hitting some needs in this portal class.
Yeah, no doubt, man. By the way, speaking of needs, if you have a need for, actually, Chris, I'm thinking maybe some good creative Christmas presents.
Mm-hmm.
Me and my wife, we like to go to concerts. Maybe concert tickets, maybe future South Carolina sporting event tickets. Maybe they're sold out already. Our friends at Game Time and the Game Time app, they can take care of that for you. Go to gametime.co, or again, just download the Game Time app. And for a limited time only, all you got to do is go on there, go to this little redeem code area, type in Gamecocks. You're going to get $20 off your first order on here. And it's like just about every other ticket app you can find, and that you just type in what you're looking for, and it's going to pop up. And the beauty of this one is that they are absolutely just dedicated to trying to save you money. You have these flash deals that will pop up and give you automatic savings. And most importantly, they got the Game Time guarantee, Chris. That means if you order something right now off the app, you order a ticket, and then later on you find the same ticket in the same section for cheaper, they're going to refund you 110% of what you paid on the Game Time app. So that is the Game Time guarantee. Check them out. Game Time app, gametime.co. Appreciate their support of our show here on GC Live, as well as several other On 3 shows around the network. We got a lot of people, Chris, talking wide receiver in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
It is a heated conversation. The summary of the conversation is, does South Carolina need what in NFL terms you would kind of say a wide receiver one?
Mm-hmm.
And do you have to go get that guy? Or does that guy emerge?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you don't find that guy, right, on paper, then yes, you're going to do everything in your power to try to have that guy emerge. But is it the best case scenario that you go out and find that guy? I say absolutely, because you're still playing other teams, right? So, like, I don't think I quite what I'm trying to say is, every team can't just say, well, I'm sure a guy will pop up. Like, there's a reason why you say, oh, that receiving core is better than Team A's receiving core is better than Team D's receiving core.
Mm-hmm.
So if every team's not going to go into the year and just be like, oh, somebody will pop up, somebody will step up. So it is true over the years, for the most part, South Carolina has almost always had a guy step into the role. And sometimes, just statistically, somebody's got to catch the most passes, right? So I don't want to say you're by default the number one, but if there's a quote number two and you never sort of have a number one, the number two becomes the number one statistically, because somebody has to lead the team in receiving. So Luedecke this past year, he was a situation where he took what was ahead of him and ran with it. Like, he absolutely stepped up, became an alpha. The year before, Juice Wells, even though we thought Josh Vann, who was the returning leading receiver, you thought he was going to be the number one. Juice steps up, takes over as number one. So, yes, if South Carolina is not able to get a true on paper number one, you hope it's a Nick Harbor, you hope that a Jared Brown is as good as you think he is, if not a step even more than that. And, you hope some of these other guys, Tyshawn Russell, Kelton Henderson, Elijah Caldwell, you hope they can take steps. You hope your freshmen coming in, Mazio Bennett, are ready to play. But do you also, at least on paper, want to find a way to give yourself the best chance as physically possible for that to happen? Ole Miss is loaded at receiver. They still went out and got Juice Wells. So those are the people you're going against. Those are the people you're having to try to defeat with this schedule. So you could get by if you have to, but on paper, do you need at least another threat? Even if you're going hey, we're wide receiver by committee, we're going to just spread the ball around and they're all going to be threats. To me, you still need at least another guy or two.
Yeah, there's a difference between having a leading receiver and having a wide receiver one type, like a guy. And look, man, if you can wind the clock back, we have the benefit of knowing what Xavier Luedecke did last year. And it was awesome, but that was the first year he had done it, right? So if South Carolina knew going into the season, let's say they didn't know, rather, that Xavier Luedecke was going to do that, but they did know Juice Wells was going to be out, they'd probably be really worried, And obviously there were times during the season that, even though you had Xavier Luedecke be the alpha that he was, you still can look and see, hey, they kind of didn't really have that number two type, because you look back at it and you say they could have had XL and Juice Wells. You look back at the 2022 season, they had Juice and they had several other guys. They kind of had basically almost 5 starters at receiver last year. And you didn't have either of those things. So you want to take it from having a guy that, like, I agree with what everybody said. Typically, South Carolina has had a guy that stepped up even when there's been some questions, right? Like 2020 is a good example. You had lost Brian Edwards. So the whole deal was, well, can Shi Smith step up and be number one? And he was. Now, that still wasn't a very good team, you know. The most extreme example, Wes, do you know how many passes Pharaoh Cooper caught in 2013? Care to guess? He caught 3 passes. He mostly ran the ball in 2013.
But then 2014 and 15, or when he caught like 70 the next year?
2014. So literally he goes from 3 catches to 69 catches for 1,136 yards. So, I mean, yeah, his first season, 2013, he rushed the ball 20 times and he caught 3 balls. That was it. Exploded the next year. Obviously, he ended up being an NFL player. Shi Smith ended up being an NFL player. Xavier Luedecke is going to be an NFL player. And so, are there guys on the roster that are capable of doing more than what they've done? Absolutely. And they'll get more chances, and they'll generally, more chances you get, more opportunities, more plays you're going to make. But this, Wes, is probably, I got to say, this is probably the most worried that you've been, because you don't feel like, aside from Nick Carver, that's probably the biggest high upside guy you've got. He's still going to be in like his second year playing receiver, right? Xavier Luedecke, he took 5 years, you know? And so if you can help it at all, you definitely want to go out and add more, so you're not making this such a question going into the season. You want to develop the guys already on the roster and add to it, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure, man. So we got a lot of questions about LT Overton. And I mean, this is one of those situations, I think, where people see, hey, former 5-star, and their eyes get kind of big, you know, about Overton. It's still been, frankly, I would say, relatively quiet on the Overton front. That was something I was told about even the visit. You know, there were overall good vibes. That was 2 weekends ago. Overall good vibes about everybody that was on campus that weekend. And that, for the most part, actually proved to be very true. Well, with Overton, just I think just kind of a little bit more reserved. And so a lot of information has not come out. We do know they visited Alabama this past weekend. Hadn't there been a little bit of FSU talk online, Chris, for Overton?
Yep. Little bit.
Not sure yet how that factors in. I will say this, this is more from the Alabama end. You don't really get the impression that he is a stone cold lock to Alabama. Like, you know, I think that was the thing. Oh, he is taking that visit. Okay, is Alabama pushing? Do you start to see reports where Alabama thinks they're definitely getting him? It does not seem like that has happened, which for South Carolina, if you're a Gamecock fan, hoping Carolina gets Overton, you know, that's a good sign. That's a good thing. I think South Carolina has done a good job of hitting on some of their other needs on the defensive line. Whether you see LT as an inside or outside guy, either way, you got a Kyle Kennard, you got a DeAndre Jules, you brought back a bunch of guys from last year. So Overton has become a little bit more of kind of an additional cherry on top potentially for this D-line class. Right now, I do think he's at least still in play.
Yeah, very much seems in play. And, you know, Gamecocks got Kyle Kennard committed, which was a really good get for them. You got Dylan Stewart committed as a freshman, Wes, which, man, imagine the excitement. Like, Dylan Stewart, by the way, kind of falls in that Josiah Thompson category, where if it was 48 hours, less than 48 hours to signing day, and we were tracking Dylan Stewart as a potential get for South Carolina, like, that would be all the chat comments. That's all it would be, is are we going to get Dylan Stewart? He's committed. Everything seems pretty locked in with that from what I've heard. So you've got some pieces there at defensive end. But Overton's a guy that obviously has a lot of talent, has a lot of athleticism, Wes. It's just still kind of up in the air. I did some checking on it before we came on the show. Still no resolution. Probably going to be Alabama or South Carolina. Nobody seems to know for sure just yet.
Hey, before we move it forward a little bit, Chris, let's talk about our friends at Liberty Tax. Overcome your tax ID, 803-462-5576. Tax time right around the corner. But, Chris, man, do you have any tax ID at all?
I have no tax ID at all. What I do have is a voice that's on the verge of being lost, Wes, which is not great for a podcast. So y'all bear with me. But yeah, Larry and the team at Liberty Tax, they have met with me. They've met with my wife. We've been in communication a lot with Larry over the course of this year, setting the course for our taxes for 2024. We feel great because we have a plan. Absolutely no tax ID. We know exactly where we are going with our taxes and have a great plan in place. He's seen it all, Wes. He's been at it for a long time in the tax game and has some great stories, has some phenomenal insight. Highly recommend. Talk to Larry and his team at Liberty Tax, a couple locations out in Irmo. Give them a call there, 803-462-5576.
Shout out to Larry. Appreciate him. Now actually a long-term sponsor of the show. Actually emailed Larry today and told him Merry Christmas and waiting to hear back, but hopefully looking like we're going to have Larry on for a good time longer. So that'll be good as well. Shout out to him as always. And so, Chris, seems like this has kind of been the commitment window for the guys who were taking visits during this little sort of time period between where you could take visits and now a dead period coming up. And you're seeing some Gamecocks pick their new schools. I saw John Darius Morgan going to UAB, going back home. DeAndre Martin, I think last week, committed to Charlotte. And, you know, we all know Mitch Jeter, Notre Dame. And then, of course, Sunday, you have Mario Anderson to Memphis, Juice Wells to Ole Miss. The Juice one kind of circled around a little bit. There was the Texas talk. There was the Tennessee talk. You had the Lane Kiffin is in Columbia chatter and online sort of drama. Then even for a moment, it looked like it maybe wasn't going to be Ole Miss, but Ole Miss circles back. Juice, who actually is graduating from South Carolina today, officially commits to Ole Miss on Sunday, which means the Gamecocks will face him in Williams-Brice Stadium next season.
That'll be fascinating, won't it, Wes? Ole Miss, they are cleaning up and trolling at the same time. Of course, Lane Kiffin trolling. He tweeted out the other day, Wes, a picture of a University of Tennessee logoed plane with a Ruby Tuesday in the background, which cracked me up. They also got, I'm going to butcher the name, DeCamarion Richardson, committed today, who played for Mississippi State last year. So they don't care. They're just going after everybody. It doesn't even matter. But yeah, that'll be fascinating. And October 5th, I believe, Wes, Ole Miss comes to Williams-Brice Stadium. Will be probably for Ole Miss the best portal class in the country to add to an already good team. And Wes, probably we were talking about this earlier, man. Probably a team that's going to be, I would think, very, very high up there in the preseason rankings and have a lot of buzz because of the team they have and what they've added to it as well. Mitch Jeter, actually, this is a while back, Wes. We probably already covered this. Mitch Jeter going to Notre Dame. That's another one. So if you kind of look at some of a lot of the guys that transferred from South Carolina fell into that healthy transfer category that you've got. But the ones that I think have probably drawn the most offseason conversation are of course, Juice, Ole Miss, Mitch Jeter, Notre Dame, and then Mario Anderson to Memphis.
Yeah, and yeah, that last one, Mario Anderson to Memphis, has definitely caught a lot of attention, I would say.
Yes.
And
yes.
I do think important to point out too, like I've seen a take online, of course, where it's like, hey, why would you go from South Carolina to Memphis. And I think it's also important to point out he didn't necessarily like the order and the timing of this matters, you know? Like if you had told it's not like he went straight from South Carolina to Memphis in terms of I knew that was going to be my option and then I picked Memphis. You know, Southern Cal, Oklahoma were two schools that were heavily mentioned here and you know, probably just filled up. So I think it's not like he just chose Memphis over South Carolina. It's that he chose to test the portal, possibly based on advice from others. And now that's sort of just where he ended up.
Yeah. I'm not going to pretend, Wes, because I'd be annoyed if somebody else tried to do it. I'm not going to pretend to say he's definitely regretting it. I don't know. You know, I don't know the ins and outs. You can look at it on the surface. Yeah, you can look at it on the surface and speculate. And if I were speculating, I would definitely have an opinion. But I do hope, man, seriously, Mario, I mean, he's an SC kid, played here at South for a year. And I do hope that he, just had a child. Congrats on that. And so I do hope he finds a great situation out there at Memphis for sure. And best of luck to him in the future for sure.
Yeah, and I do. I mean, dude, I hope there is some NIL support for him there because, like you said, he did just have a kid. Literally, I guess that was on Saturday night or Sunday morning. I know he posted it over the weekend, and he's been nothing but great to us. I know we got interviews with him right after he committed to South Carolina initially. I did a Garnet Trust Hour with him, and I do. I mean, frankly, I don't think it was the decision in his best interest. I don't think I've said that publicly. I kind of was like, well, hey, let's wait and see if he pops up at Southern Cal or Oklahoma. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we're all wrong. But that was not what happened. And, I do think that the fact that he could have been supported in this state for well past his time at South Carolina is a factor in this, but or should have been a considered factor in this. Yep. But again, I'm with you, man. I truly hope it works out there because I do think he got some bad advice along the way, but that's just our opinion. So maybe we're dead wrong. But and certainly, you know what? Hopefully, honestly, I know some people will completely disagree with this, Chris, but maybe there are businesses that still support Mario to an extent in the state just because he does have a kid on the way. And he did bail South Carolina out this past season. Let's not forget that. I know some people will say, well, he's gone. He picked somewhere else. So be it. But there is also something to be said for kind of being the bigger person about it and realizing he, I think, got caught up in, a decision. And we'll see what happens moving forward. And somebody did ask, did Mario have an opportunity to come back to South Carolina? If you're talking about like from the end of last season, like would he have been welcomed back to South Carolina? Absolutely, 100%. And Chris, would South Carolina have taken transfer portal running backs anyway? Yes.
Yes.
Would they have taken as many as they did with Mario Anderson coming back? I would say probably not. I tend to think Oscar Attaway essentially took Mario's spot at South Carolina.
Yeah. I think you're right. You probably would have still seen two transfer backs, Wes. And if the question is, could he have come back once he entered the portal? It's kind of a complex question. And from kind of following the story behind the scenes, The answer is probably yes under the right circumstances, but eventually it just got to the
And
point
depending
where
on timing.
depending on timing and circumstances, and eventually it just got to a point where it became evident that was not going to happen.
Yeah, and I just the reason I answered that the way I did for like, I feel like there's been this idea floated out there that like, oh, South Carolina was gonna reshape the running back room anyway, so they basically didn't want Mario back, or they encouraged him to. No, initially that was not the case at all. Now, I think once he hit the portal, South Carolina at that point they're saying, "Hey, we got to go sign running backs. It is what it is at this point." So I tend to think, and you can't see the future. I tend to think they would have still. I know they would have still taken Rocket. I think they probably still would have been able to, and probably would have taken Jawarn Howell as kind of that younger guy still with eligibility left. So that's why I sort of felt like Attaway pretty much took his slot, because Attaway also an older guy, experienced guy, and also has experience kind of being in our platoon, a 1-2 back situation, as opposed to necessarily wanting to come in and just be the guy. So anyway, it's interesting how those two situations turned out. Juice, I tend to think, Chris, when Gamecock fans kind of take their garnet glasses off, Juice will go to Ole Miss and do quite well, I think. Like, he will catch a lot of passes. He'll have success, probably get drafted highly. And, he's still at a position that has more value. I think if you're a running back, especially if you're an in-state guy, if you're a running back, you better be careful making portal decisions.
Yeah, you do. And it's fascinating now, Wes, thinking through this. We started hearing when the transfer portal and the one-time transfer came up, when the transfer portal kind of really came about and started being a factor in college football. We started hearing from people in the recruiting world, hey, I mean, you really got to do a good job of keeping relationships now, because you never know. And you look at some of the guys that South Carolina's recruited, some of them are just kind of like, there's not a connection. You just go out and you see a guy on film and you go out and you try to get him. But a lot of times there is a past connection, family connection, somebody you recruited, somebody that a coach worked with at a previous school, recruited a guy and you knew of him. I mean, there's all sorts of connections there. LT Overton's one, right? I mean, LT Overton used to play at the high school of current staffer Jody Wright's brother. I mean, you got all sorts of stuff like that. And so keeping good relationships with guys now is kind of, it's a big part of it. And so when guys go elsewhere in recruiting, you never know. You might see them down the road.
For sure, man. All right, cool. That kind of wraps it up, I think. We had a question: what positions is South Carolina still looking at with the portal? I mean, obviously, they still want to officially add a quarterback of some type. I still think you're more looking for somebody who can come in and compete for a job. I still think the KJ Jefferson stuff was completely overblown, but they do want a quarterback who can come in and compete. And if not, at least kind of provide a potential backup role. Receiver, one or two guys, I would think. Maybe another offensive lineman if it's the right guy. LT Overton, as we said, still out there, still available. I tend to maybe think that potentially swings back a little bit more in favor of the Gamecocks based on what you hear from the Alabama side, not being, hey, Alabama feels great now, or hey, Alabama's pushing really hard. And let's see. For the most part, that's kind of it. I think, will more guys pop up? Of course, that's a possibility. But those are the guys we've heard the most about, unless I'm forgetting anybody, Chris.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. DeBron Gatling, the main high school guy that we're publicly tracking right now. And then Out of the portal. I agree with you. Portal, you need a couple receivers, maybe look at an edge, offensive line. You can kind of take your time on offensive line, Wes, because it doesn't seem like South Carolina's going 100% got to get another offensive tackle. They'd like to have one if possible, but it's not something where they're going to just reach and just take a warm body there. They're going to kind of take their time. They're going to keep the spring portal window in mind and see if they can go out and find another guy there. Hey, Wes, before we get out of here, let me mention this. Our friends at Ariat, they've put together the Ultimate Gamecock Fan Survey for us. We've put it together. They have sponsored it, and they're giving away to one lucky fan an Ariat prize pack that is absolutely awesome. And so you can do that if you want to go to this link that I'm dropping in the chat right now on all the different platforms that we're streaming to. If you do that, no purchase necessary. Just fill it out. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your Gamecock fandom. We'll enter you into a drawing to get an Ariat prize pack. And you can go do that. It's free to do it. It's free to enter. No purchase necessary, and we'll enter you into the drawing for the Ariat prize pack.
Hey, do we know what we might get in that prize pack, Chris?
Yeah, let me tell you right now. I've got it right in front of me. So
like
in this prize
information here,
it is. I was keeping it like a little bit mysterious, but let's tell the people. So you're going to get some vouchers if you win this prize pack. One of them is for a pair of Ariat boots, up to a $270 value. And I actually just got mine, Wes, my Ariat boots. Man, they are awesome. There's also a voucher for one of their workwear pieces. That can be, I think, everything from their coats to other different, jeans, things like that. And also a pair of casual footwear. They've got some different shoes. Some of them are kind of like the Hey Dude style shoes. They've also got those at Ariat. They have all sorts of really cool stuff. So that'll be coming your way, possibly, if you fill out the Ultimate South Carolina Fan Survey from us.
Yeah, shout out to our friends at Ariat for sponsoring that and hooking us up with some goodies to turn around and give away. Interesting. You never know what's going to happen with the portal. Dante Moore, Oregon, the favorite now. UCLA transfer quarterback. Very interesting. Which they already got Dylan Gabriel too, right?
Yep.
Stacking up.
For a year. yeah, definitely. Very interesting stuff.
All right, y'all. We're out of time. That's going to do it. Appreciate y'all listening. As always, we'll let y'all know later in the week the plan for shows. Obviously, signing day is Wednesday. So a little bit, some of this will be up in the air. I think I just saw Shane Beamer's going to talk at 3 that day as well. So we may have to move some things around. Also be on the lookout, maybe an extended presence on 107.5 that day too. So just, of course, check out GamecockCentral.com. If you didn't see it, we got new information on DeBron Gatling that has been posted yesterday. And so plenty of other stuff that'll be popping up too. Check it out, GamecockCentral.com. Right now, by the way, if you're not a subscriber, let me get this out of the way. If you're not a subscriber, you got a couple of options. New subscribers can get 2 months for $1, code SCAR1. And then for this other one, it's just more of a limited time thing. You don't need a code, but you have to get in before Wednesday. It is 50% off an annual subscription. So a couple of options for you there if you're not a subscriber on Gamecock Central. Either way, appreciate your support here on the show. We'd love to have your support on GamecockCentral.com as well. For Chris, I'm Wes.